gravesite. They only use limestone for that purpose. Now, one of the many things that scientists really haven't noticed is that even their ancestors, which we had called Anasazi, their burial grounds, only limestone is found on top of the gravesite. So those stones serve a purpose. Same purpose as what's found north, the scaffold. What they're trying to do is that explain that it's a burial in the sky. They believe they place the relatives closer to the afterlife. But the real reason they use that scaffold is the same reason why campers will hang their food up high in the air, to protect the relative's body from scavengers. Same reason why the Hopi will place a huge pile of stones on top of the gravesite. But I'm also asking about cremation. Cremation was ever practiced among Indians. It's still being practiced today among tribes living further south or west, such as the Mojave, Yaqui, Popopa, and Tonopah. Still practice cremation. The reason they do this is because of the desert environment they live in, where it takes a long time for a relative's body to return to the earth. A cadaver can also pose serious health threats. In order to prevent the spread of any type of illness, they'll cremate their relatives. But the Navajo Apache burial practice is different from all of these. One of the many similarities we still have with our Mongolian relatives. And why do I always bring up Genghis Khan, whose title is pronounced as Genghis Khan? It's actually pronounced Genghis Khan. There's also linguistic similarities, such as the word Hun, which is the Mongolian word for leader, which Western Navajo and Apache still use as our word for leader also. But we do not have established burial grounds. We are not allowed to know where our relatives are buried. So why no one knows where Genghis Khan is buried as well? So it's still very much a part of the culture of the Western Navajo, and has pretty much dissipated among the other Navajo and Apache bands. My family still follows this. We do not have established burial grounds. This actually ties with grieving. We do know that if grieving to last a long time can cause not only emotional problems, but also mental problems, spiritual problems, and ultimately physical problems. People tend to waste away. We try to lessen this as much as possible. So this also ties in with the belief in our belief in the afterlife, that we created ourselves with the memories created here. There's always a time of storytelling to share the good memories with one another. But what I'm going to explain to you actually involves a sick relative. When a relative is about to pass away because of an illness, they are separated from the rest of the family and keep from spreading that illness. There are also two chosen relatives who will care for that person, chosen not only for their intestinal fortitude, but their strength, their, what we would know today as their immune system. Because there's always that chance you could contract that illness. So that sick relative was usually taken to a hidden area, such as deeper into the woods or behind a hill, where a small conical nail hogan is constructed just large enough for the three. So that relative is cared for. They are washed, the stories are exchanged as needed, fed. So that relative passes, a hole is knocked in the north wall of that hogan, creating a new doorway to the north, where we're told our afterlife exists. That relative's body is then passed through that hole carried around that hogan in a counterclockwise manner. The Navajo or the Apache relatives would then take that body back into the hogan and bury it. That burial hogan is then dismantled and that site is never revealed. Now, I personally had never seen a burial hogan, had only known of it through stories. But if you ever get a chance to go up to the Monument Valley, inside that valley there's an actual Navajo burial hogan.
This is awesome.
So it's a rare sight. But also, after all of this is completed, those two individuals will come home in stages. They don't come directly home. A ceremony known as the enemy way is performed for them, not only to symbolically cleanse them of the trauma they had experienced, but also to watch for symptoms. When they finally come home 4 days later, they will announce that relative's name one final time. That name is never again spoken. So if we maybe speak of a relative who has passed, we'll call them by how we're related, such as uncle or grandfather. That relative's personal property is also then burned. Everything is burned. So, and why it's rare to find any old Navajo or Apache relics. And why in the episode of the Antique Roadshow, Navajo blanket was appraised at $500,000. Because such things are rare. So this is what's found among the Navajo and the Apache. So it's just one of many variations of burial practices found among Indian tribes. Okay, folks, we are going to have lunch here. We do have reservations set up, so I'm going to drop you guys off here. This is the Hopi Cultural Center. The large building is where we are going to have lunch, so follow the sidewalk. I give Indian directions, so you end up getting lost. So what you're gonna do is get to the glass doors. There's a window that says a sign that says open. Go inside. Let them know you're with Brian and Redstone. Our table should be set up, and I do take care of you guys. But I do have to let you know they don't have surf and turf here. Yeah, people always ask about steak and lobster when I mention I want to take care of them. Yeah, so and it's also a dry reservation, so you won't find any alcohol here either. So go ahead and go to the building. Let them know you're with Brian and Redstone. As soon as you're seated, order something to drink. When I get there, I'll explain the menu.
What do you advise that we buy here to eat?
I do take care of you guys. It is a restaurant, so there's a menu involved, and I'll explain all of that when I get there.
But what's good?
It's all good.
Okay. I thought maybe there was something special.
There are special traditional food items.
Oh.
Yeah, so I'll explain all of that when I get there. Okay. Also the time of year in which it's culturally safer to hunt both genders of animals. Now, culturally, it is forbidden to kill a pregnant female animal, and it's believed will affect not only the children, but also the women. But there's also the psychological, emotional impact this can have. The best way to understand this would be fertilized eggs. Occasionally, you break open an egg that has been fertilized, there's a ribbon of blood or an actual embryo, and it shocks you. I know people have completely stopped eating eggs after they've experienced something like that. So that's what we try to prevent, that shock, and why it's culturally forbidden to hunt female animals during the spring and summer months. But the body fat is what was very important. It's still considered a delicacy here among the Navajo and Hopi and many other tribes. Still call it sweet meat because it's a dense source of calories and nutrition. So Indians love gristle. But there was also a time in which a lot more snow would fall. This combined with the high winds up here would create very deep snowdrifts. And buffalo, having shorter legs, had a tougher time moving around. We also once had knowledge of snowshoes. So using snowshoes, we would simply walk up to these and trap buffalo and harvest them. So I came to realize that the buffalo dance represents not only snow, but the buffalo hunt and its collaboration between the Navajo, Apache, and the Hopi. We helped each other out as much as we could. But most humans naturally remember the negative events, such as the raiding, which did occur as well, which is why one of the main reasons why Navajo and Hopi are viewed as enemies, which was never really true at all. So this buffalo dance, which is also a social ceremony, collaborates this type of interaction, or this collaboration. It's just one of many ceremonies that are performed throughout the year. But the buffalo dance is only performed during the fall and winter months, when the snows come. So there are many other social ceremonies as well. But as I mentioned, ceremonies are only attended by Hopi, like the snake dance. Snakes do represent water. Only the Hopi snake priests will handle snakes. Other Hopi will not. Arizona, I had mentioned earlier this morning, is one of the last places left where here in America we can still find a lot of cold-blooded Indian tribes. So they also still have a weakened immune system that was once evident among all Indian tribes. So because of this weakened immune system, we avoid certain things that they can cause an illness, like snakes. Snakes usually harbor bacteria beneath their scales like E. coli or salmonella. So we avoid handling these animals. But Hopi snake priests, who are members of the rain societies, are the ones who will walk around the landscape about a week prior to the snake dance, which is usually held mid-July. So they'll collect snakes, non-venomous snakes, like gopher snakes. There was a time when they actually used rattlesnakes, but because of liability, they really don't handle poisonous snakes anymore. So they collect gopher snakes. We'll take them into the kivas where they will wash these snakes repeatedly to try to wash away some of the bacteria. But during the actual performance, the men will paint their bodies in black and white with snake-like patterns. This is also found among the Mandan tribes of the Great Plains, part of the culture that's taken out into that area. They also revere snakes. The healers will also coat their bodies with animal fat, medicinal plants, as well as charcoal and wood ash. I create a protective coating. So only snake priests will handle snakes. Edward Curtis claims to have taken part in the Hopi snake dance, which may have been possible because he spent about a year and a half among these mesas, not only to learn the Hopi culture, but also to take photos. Another very prominent individual who attended a Hopi snake dance was President Theodore Roosevelt. They actually got to see this. But culturally, only Hopi and their non-Hopi in-laws are allowed to attend. So it's a ceremony that's closed off to everyone. So different types of ceremonies are performed during certain times of the year and are repeated on an annual basis. But because of more modern history, there are also a number of new casinos that have been created. One of which is only found on Third Mesa, the mesa directly in front of us. That's also where Christianity was first accepted. It ties in with their prophecy of a white brotherhood come from the east. But there's a debate on who had arrived first, the Mennonites or the Catholics. But they were welcomed on top of the mesa. At the time, the lower communities at the base of the mesas did not exist. And this was because the higher elevations offered better protection against raiding tribes. But the Christians were accepted. They also were on their, in a sense, crusades trying to convert the Hopi. So what they had done is they built a church on top of Hopi burial grounds. Well, the Hopi elders really couldn't do anything about this. Again, mostly because they really were never seen as a warrior tribe. So the church was built. There was a bell tower. One day lightning struck that bell. The Hopi elders took that as a sign. So a fight broke out on top of Third Mesa. Christianity was banished, as were the Hopi who would not revert back to the original culture. And they're the ones who established a community at the base of Third Mesa, known as Kukwetsnuvi. Kukwetsnuvi is a Hopi word that, well, refers to the coloration of the rocks. So because of that fight, the Hopi now on Third Mesa have a type of katsina which they call the priest killer. And the carvings of that particular katsina are extremely rare. With all the years I've been among the Hopi mesas and the few years I've been a tour guide, I've only seen carvings of this particular katsina once. And so all ties with the history that took place on top of this mesa. But the bell that was struck by lightning also still exists. It's in the lower village. So it's known as Kukwetsnuvi. Tuma City is actually further north, about an hour and a half. But the church still stands. And because it's built on burial ground, even the Hopi will not go near it. So we won't be able to get to the remains of the church. But as we said that mesa, you will have a better view when we get to the top. And it is still considered sacred ground. Even the Hopi will not go there. But there's a lot of unique history on top of that mesa. Today, approximately 100 people still choose to live in that village, which is roughly 1,000 years old. And that's also where modern amenities are not allowed. But this mesa in front of us was once the home of over 4,000 Hopi. And their community, their city in a sense, extended to the southernmost edge of the mesa itself. So I've been told that this village was so large that people who lived on the edge of the mesa really didn't know the people who lived on the northern end. But again, less than 100 people choose to still live there. So it is the oldest continuously inhabited village in America. It's also about 1,000 years old. So when the Hopi moved to the top of these mesas for protection, this was the first one that they had moved to the top of. So there is a logic behind that migration also. But as I mentioned, it is culturally forbidden, politically incorrect to call them Anasazi. They really don't like being known as Anasazi, but Western Africans still often refer to them as Anasazi, tying with the history of what had happened to them. So we'll be visiting at least one family there. There's a young lady who's also an educator whose name is Geraldine, who's also a potter. And she does take the time to explain the techniques involved. She also teaches this to the Hopi children in her spare time. A majority of young Hopi today, just like all Indians, cannot speak their own tribal language. So they've turned to tourism. Tourism is a major source of revenue for the Hopi tribe. So the young Hopi want to learn such things as carving katsina dolls or making pottery, they'll go to an older Hopi, such as their grandparents. A majority of Hopi elders do speak English. So the instructions always begin in English, and as they continue, Hopi words will be added. So by the time the instructions are completed, that young Hopi should be able to speak are doing a tremendous job, but it is an uphill battle. So many older Hopi are trying very hard to reintegrate this into the lives of their young people. So this is also what Geraldine does. There are also a number of families there who will invite you right into their homes. Now, First Mesa does still adhere to the original lunar and solar-based calendars, which is the reason why the other villages look to them. So on First Mesa, if a ceremony is going to start midweek, that when the religious leaders say, okay, now it's time, the ceremony will start, whereas the other villages have modified this and will perform them on the weekends. So all the other surrounding villages do closely watch First Mesa. And when they start a ceremony, the others know they have to follow in succession. So Third Mesa may be starting their preparations for the bean dance. So that we won't know until we get there. But because much of the culture is still retained here, I hate to put it this way, but the Hopi here are a little more open. As I mentioned, they'll invite you right into their homes. So don't be afraid if they invite you in. It is a code of conduct, so be polite. If you do get invited to their homes, you will notice school photos, family photos. So this part of their culture, restriction placed on photography may seem like a contradiction. So I always recommend that if you want to take a photo of an individual, ask that person permission. Permission is usually given, not always, but usually given. But as I mentioned this morning, do not take photos of the landscape or of the buildings themselves. But this is also one of the only places where the original type of construction still exists. How the stones were collected from the surrounding landscape and used to build up walls, and why many of these buildings did not have windows or doors. So I will point that out as well. This village was also once surrounded by a defensive wall with an opening to the north, creating a bottleneck. And as I mentioned, the Hopi did defend themselves, even though they were not seen as a warrior tribe. They did fight to defend their families. So it's somewhat different from the history found in textbooks. So this village is somewhat unique, not only because it's the oldest, but also because many of the Hopi who choose to live here still retain much of the language and culture. So we're also going to be stopping off by a gallery of which the proprietor is a local. So hopefully she's home. Her name is Sandra. And if she's home, she'll also give you a better explanation of why they do not allow modern amenities, power lines or water lines into the oldest part of the village. But here's an example of how the original homes would have looked.